The Winchester League of Women Voters is a nonprofit organization that promotes informed participation in all levels of government. We hold forums with political candidates and on issues like flood control. We register eligible voters at the high school, honor town employees at an annual lunch. Our members are women and men 18 years and up. Our activities are designed to fit busy lives.
We're just getting started. Tonight's meeting is meant to be a forum to discuss flooding issues, the status and coordination of agency efforts, and the range of alternatives being considered for evaluation. Therefore, we invite an open exchange of questions and ideas. So, Mike, thank you very much.
Good evening. Thank you for coming out. My name is Mike Hill. I'm with NSER, and we are leading a team that consists of ourselves, Weston and Sampson engineers, Public Archaeology Laboratory, and the body group. And actually, Yulia's body is here with us this evening. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation, and several of us are going to get up and talk about different aspects of the project. And then we're going to have an open discussion at the end of that. So I ask if you could hold your questions till the end. I think we may wind up answering some of the questions as we go along in the presentation. Can you start the first slide now? These are some of the folks. You'll see some of these folks tonight. Matt Kennedy's here with me tonight. He'll be speaking about some of the issues. We've got Yulia's body here with us. Erica Malloy is here with us from NSER, and I've got Mike Penko from the Corps of Engineers who will also be talking to you this evening. And this has been a long process already, and this is just a brief chronology of the process that we've gone through. The July 1999 report was a preliminary design study which identified very specific alternatives in specific locations along the Aberdona River designed to relieve flooding from a very specific storm event. And that material was brought forward into an environmental notification form, which was filed with the Secretary of Environmental Affairs in May of 2003. And as part of that, there was a request that a project, actually three of the projects, be allowed to move forward without preparation of an EIR. And as the chairman mentioned, that request in June of 2003 was actually denied, and the scope for the environmental impact report was issued by the Secretary of Environmental Affairs. And that's a scope for what's called the draft environmental impact report, and that's the process that we're in right now, getting information needed to prepare the draft environmental impact report. In December of 2003, there was, as the chairman mentioned, another request to exempt just the cross street culvert, and that request was granted. So that project was actually pulled out of the scope for the draft environmental impact report. North and south covers all the way through downtown. It doesn't cover the entire town, but there's a couple things that strike us when we look at this slide. There's an aerial photograph, and the first thing is the level of development that has occurred throughout the entire corridor, and we see that if we look at the entire watershed. The second thing that strikes us here, and we'll see that in more detail later on, is the amount of work that's been done on the Aberdona River. There are pieces of the Aberdona River that have been almost completely straightened, as you can see a lot of work down here. That's not, the natural channel course was over here at one point in time. Now it's right in here. The projects that were brought forward in the environmental notification form were very specific. And in each one of those locations, there was one alternative that was shown. And that's one of the first things that the Secretary said is, you have to give me more alternatives. There have to be more ways to skin the cat to be able to take care of flooding within the corridor. So we're taking a step back, and we're taking a step back because that last slide, the aerial photograph, represents this piece right here. It actually didn't even go down to the Mystic Lakes. This piece right here. There's a whole issue of the water that's coming at you, and then there's a whole issue of the water that is being exported from the system to the downstream receivers. NSER is also in the process of preparing a new model for the entire watershed for the Federal Emergency Management Agency as part of their flood control study. The flood control studies and maps for this entire watershed are being redone right now. This is a close-up of some of the projects, and again, rather than concentrate on what was done, this was going to be a channel widening project. There's a nice straight channel. What we're doing when we look at these areas, rather than looking at just the individual projects in these areas, is we're trying to take a look at what's the opportunity in this entire reach to do something to alleviate the flooding that affects these folks over here. So we're going to take a step back and we're going to take a look at what other kinds of alternatives besides just a channel widening alternative might also have efficacy in this area and take care of some of the flooding issues. This is the next section down. We've got issues around the high school playing field. The river, as you know, goes underground here. So there are a number of different alternatives that we need to look at, and this end of the box culvert here causes some significant flooding in this area, and actually there's some pretty significant flooding at the outlet as well. What this slide also shows is it shows two of the projects that the chairman talked about before that are in a different color that have already been completed. We're going further downstream. We're going downstream from downtown. Here's where we are right now. There's Center Falls Dam. One of the projects, and it's a slightly different color because that one's kind of halfway done. So one of the projects here is halfway done. There's some more work to be done there. There's the Mount Vernon Street Bridge, which has historic implications, but also has hydraulic implications on the system. There's a long stretch of the river that I'm actually going to ask my colleague Mike Penko from the Corps of Engineers to come up and talk about.
My name is Mike Penko. I'm with the Army Corps of Engineers. I'm the ecologist for the Corps working on this project. The Corps has been involved in this project for a couple of years now under a authority called Section 205 of the Clean Water Act. It allows the Corps to build flood control projects in situations like this if it's economically justified. At this point in time, the Corps process is really just getting started. I'll try to go through a few of the steps that are involved. Probably the first thing that has to be done is a hydrological analysis. We need to know basically how high does the water get and how often does the water get that high. And what we're going to do is use the information that NSER is developing with their flood control model to help us do that analysis. So we have a hydrological engineer who's working on that part of the project. We also have some very preliminary plans underway that we're developing, different alternatives to solve or help reduce flooding in this part of the Winchester. And we've got some very preliminary costs associated with each of those plans. At this point in time, the benefit-to-cost ratio, one of the plans, probably the most likely one, the most practical that we could construct, is just about 1. Literally, it's right on 1, which is pretty close to the minimum level that the Corps can participate in. But these are preliminary numbers. The economist, I spoke to her today. She's about 70% done with her work. The design engineer who's actually going to be working on this is in the Middle East right now. He's coming back in about 3 or 4 weeks, and he'll be working on this. So a lot of work is going to be done in the next several months. Right around the same time, Mike Tuhill and NSER is doing their studies on the rest of the river. What we hope to be able to do is include, or is to provide NSER with a lot of information for their report. Plus, we'll be doing our own report, which will have a recommendation in whether or not the federal government can participate in this study. But right now, the alternative that we're looking at most closely, doesn't mean it's the only alternative, but is to widen this reach of the river from about there to there roughly, where it's most narrow, most channelized. The thought is to widen it and also to create a bit of a shelf, a low flow channel, and then a slightly elevated shelf, which would provide some habitat. We're very constrained here because Mystic Valley Parkway, as you know, of course, is along here. And then along this side, there's room, but unfortunately there's a sewer line, an old 100-year-old sewer line, which we really can't touch. I think it's an MWRA sewer line. We just can't deal with that. So there's very limited room to work with. But what we're going to try to do is increase the channel capacity as much as possible while minimizing the impacts and maybe even improving the habitat a little bit, the riparian habitat. I'm the ecologist on the job. I haven't talked much about what we've done so far, but last summer we did a fishery survey of this section of the river. And previous summer, we did some wetland flagging and some vegetation work. So now I know what the vegetation, the plant community along the stretch of the river is. You know, a little bit about the wildlife and a little bit about the fishways. Of course, working hard on this study, and we're going to be giving a lot of information to ENSA for them to incorporate into our report. And hopefully the two reports will kind of come together in the end, and we'll come up with a solution that will work for your town.
As Mike mentioned, the Corps has a very similar environmental process to ours to satisfy, and that's the process under the National Environmental Policy Act. And what we're doing is we're working with the Corps, we're also working with the folks from the state of Massachusetts, and we're dovetailing those two processes together so that we put out a consolidated set of documents. We have meetings like this that talk about both their project and our project. So we're coming at this from a single project perspective. The other thing that's been done in here and in other parts of the rivers, there's been quite a bit of work done on the sediment quality. And whenever you talk about dredging projects in here, that becomes an issue, the sediment quality. So there's a lot of background information that's already been generated that we're pulling into this process. In the Secretary's scope on the ENF and on the Notice of Project Change, these were the primary project components that are being required to be studied within the draft EIR. And the ones in red, alternatives analysis, flood control, wetlands, historic cultural resources, and stakeholder coordination, were the ones that generated the most comment and the ones that had the biggest scope from the Secretary of Environmental Affairs. So we're going to talk about some of those individual elements of the draft EIR, draft environmental impact report, here for a few minutes. The first key issue is alternatives analysis. One of the major comments on the materials that were sent into the Secretary was that, as I mentioned earlier, that there was not a full and rigorous look at different alternatives, and alternatives other than structural alternatives. We're also going to be looking at some non-structural, some policy alternatives, some alternatives that can be done with other communities to help alleviate some of the downstream flooding, some of the water coming into your town. It may turn out that when we do the modeling, that some of the alternatives, due to the changes in the watershed, really don't do what they were originally designed to do at this point in time, and may have to be augmented. It may also turn out that some of these alternatives just don't work, and we have to come up with other alternatives. So I know a lot of you are very used to seeing a graphic like this with these particular numbers and thinking there's going to be this exact structural element in this place, and that may or may not turn out to be the case as we go forward. One of the other key issues here is flood control, and I'm actually going to ask Matt Kennedy to come up, and I'll drive the bus there for a while. Have Matt come up and talk to you a little bit about the other project that we're also doing, the FEMA flood control project, and how it fits in here.
One of the most key issue that we're concerned with here is solving Winchester's flood control problem. And our goal is to be able to do that, to solve that Winchester's flood control problem without exacerbating downstream flood problems and or cause problems upstream of Winchester as well. One thing that we're currently doing that is on a parallel track from this, we're working for the Federal Emergency Management Agency conducting a flood insurance restudy of the entire Mystic River, Aberjona River watershed. It's a full detailed study of all of the flooding sources, all the rivers within the watershed. A resurvey of all the topography of the watershed, detailed survey of every bridge and structure within the watershed. And we're developing one comprehensive watershed-wide hydrologic and hydraulic model so that we can determine when it rains, how much water is generated from the watershed, and how that water flows through the watershed, and to what elevation water does go to for any number of design storm scenarios, as well as for calibration to existing storm events such as the significant storm that occurred in 1998. And one of the, I guess the other key benefit of that is we'll have this tool available for us to use in evaluating Winchester's flood control problems as well. The product that we're developing for FEMA is going to be a digital flood insurance rate map. I don't know if everybody's used to seeing the paper-based maps. The The new mapping will be done in a geographic information system type environment, so it'll be all a digital map, and that'll be available as that project continues. This project relies heavily on the use of geographic information systems to automate building of the model data that goes into the models, as well as to take that model and analyze that data and show maps to be able to evaluate how that interfaces with the land. We're going to use this model to evaluate the existing 15 or remaining flood control projects. We're going to evaluate not just a 100-year storm. We're going to look at a wide range of storm events. We're going to look at a 1 or 2 year storm event, the kind of storm that that we see fairly often. It still results in floods, that do result in damages in the area, as well as a 10-year storm and a 50-year storm. So a wide range. So we're not just saying are these flood control improvements going to only help in a large event? Are they going to help in a small event, or are they going to cause downstream damages in any one of these events? And our goal is to design a set of flood control alternatives that do not result in downstream impacts, as well as alleviating flooding issues in the town of Winchester. A couple of other alternatives that we'll need to look at based on the Secretary's scope, and then just based on engineering judgment, what will be the effects of increasing the storage in the main channel of the river through Winchester? Can we reduce flooding through not necessarily just increasing the ability of the river to convey flood flows through the town, but also to be able to store additional flood flows? So that'll be one of the primary alternatives we'll be looking at. Another one, from a more watershed-wide perspective, is can we increase the amount of storage that takes place in the watershed, in a practical manner, and still affect flood flows. And again, the goal is to be able to use these models that we've developed to demonstrate that we have an effective set of flood control alternatives, and also demonstrate that we're not going to impact anybody upstream or downstream of the project. Thanks.
As Matt mentioned, one of the distinct advantages of using this particular process is that there's going to be a consistent base. There's a consistent base that all of the towns in the watershed are using, that the Corps is using, that we're using. There's going to be one base of analysis, so that when projects are done in different areas, they're all done using the same baseline information. And that way, all of those projects work together. One of the other key areas that Mike talked about a little bit earlier is wetlands. The Secretary had some great reservations about some of the projects because along the Aberdeen River there are some riparian wetland systems, and there were questions as to whether or not the way that the designs were structured, whether or not those wetlands were going to be destroyed and not replaced. One of the things that Mike's group is looking at, and we'll be looking at as well, is can we have our cake and eat it too? Can we get flood control? Can we get inline storage? Can we get multiple use along the corridor? And can we increase the habitat value of the wetlands and add wetlands into the system? The wetlands buffer flood flow. So there's a win-win here by getting additional habitat, by getting a nicer recreational resource, nicer area to go by, and getting that flood control that you get from wetlands. There are opportunities in the corridor besides the area that Mike's group is looking at to do projects like this. We may also have some opportunities offline to get some offline storage that also get us some habitat value issues. One of the projects that was requested as part of the waiver was to be able to do the Mount Vernon Street Bridge, and that was denied. There has to be additional study of the structure and of the hydraulic functioning of the proposed changes to the structure before the State Historic Preservation Officer and the State Historic Commission can allow this process to proceed. Next slide, please. Stakeholder involvement was a key issue. The Secretary received a lot of comments that boiled down, said the way that the projects were presented was too parochial, was too focused just on what happens within the town without taking a look at what happens upstream and downstream, without involving those other groups in the process. There are constraints due to infrastructure. Mike talked earlier about a sewer, an MWA sewer, and actually that's in several different locations along the river. That was a very convenient place to run sewers. Gravity sewers in the old days was running right by the river. So no surprise when we go out there to work on the river, we're going to find infrastructure. We're going to find things like pipes under bridges. So this bridge opening may be perfectly fine hydraulically. Perhaps that pipe is causing some of the trouble. We're going to find older bridges, arch bridges. We've got the culverts, the culverts coming out from under the high school. So we've got a lot of infrastructure that we have to be aware of while we're doing the planning and engineering of the alternatives. The regulatory process is a long one, and we're up here. We're up here at the beginning. We're working with NEPA and with the Department of Environmental Protection preparing the draft environmental impact report. State agencies can't take actions on permits until the NEPA process is completed, and that's draft and final environmental impact report. But that doesn't. Under the Wetland Protection Act, the issue of the wetlands, especially the riparian wetlands, was a big issue. And we had discussions yesterday with the DEP about how to structure the alternatives so that it's a win-win and so that it can get approved, the projects can get approved. We have involvement with the Corps of Engineers, not just in their project, but when we're working in the water of the United States, there's permitting that's required for these other projects through the Corps of Engineers. And we have water quality certification, dredge spoil disposal, perhaps structure licensing under the Massachusetts Chapter 91, which is called the Waterway Licensing Program. So there's a long series, and as the chairman said earlier, that's actually the third phase. We have to get through the draft and the final environmental impact reports first. We're doing the planning, the regulatory strategy, some of the preliminary design, environmental reporting. All of these processes work with each other and ultimately help move us towards construction and post-construction. Here's a shot at the draft EIR project schedule, and we're back here. This is the initial stakeholder outreach meeting. So we've started working on all of these issues, and we've got a ways to go. Where we're trying to wind up with this process is out here in July and August to have a draft EIR out on the street. In the interim, we have other coordination meetings with the stakeholders. Before the draft EIR hits the street, during this distribution, because your comment, your review and comment is very important in this process. The key issues were alternatives, downstream flooding and involvement of the stakeholders, the cultural resources in the corridor, and the Wetlands Protection Act, and the potential need to have a variance from the Wetlands Protection Act, which is unfortunately a fairly long and onerous process, and one that we're trying to find a way with the Department of Environmental Protection of not having to go through. That's it. There's the watershed. Here's where we are, and I'm going to bring Ilias Body up, and Ilias is going to help us moderate your questions and comments.
When you see a chessboard, does it fascinate you? Would you like to play some more chess? Have you played at school, at home, online, with some friends? If you have, and you'd like to play some more chess, we have a chess club in Winchester. It meets at the Church of the Epiphany on Church Street. We play on Friday evenings. You can call us at the number shown on the screen, or check out the webpage. Anyway, it's your move.
My name is Ilias Bhatti, and I'm the president of the Bhatti Group. I am part of the answer team tonight, and I'm very, very delighted to have been invited to participate in this public forum. So at this time, I'm going to open it up, and feel free to raise your hand, and let's see if the question is easy, I might answer it. If it's very difficult, then I'll hand it over to my team.
My name's Tom Rayfield. I'm a former chairman of the Winchester's Water System Review Committee. I was the director of the Mystic River Watershed. I'm basically here mainly because of being a past commodore and former harbor master for the Winchester Boat Club. So we get downstream of whatever comes along down there. My question is simple. Whenever there's a flood, there's a concurrent overflow of sewerage. So is that being taken care of, into consideration in this whole project?
We're working with the MWRA. The MWRA has a lot of infrastructure in the area, and they have CSO problems, and they're working on the siphon chamber right now by the railroad tracks, and they've got some other projects going. That's one of the reasons why we have Weston and Sampson on the team with us, because they're also working with them on some of their infrastructure projects. This project isn't a combined sewer overflow design project. This project is a study of the flooding situations and provision of alternatives to the flooding situations. And insofar as the overflow from the sewer adds to the flooding, it will be considered. But in reality, what winds up happening in the CSO is the stormwater is getting into the sewer and then getting out into the river. And if you stop it from getting into the sewer and out into the river, it goes straight into the river. So it's there in one form or another. The difficulty with the CSO is that it gets contaminated on the way. And so, yes, there's a lot of effort being made to separate out wastewater and stormwater and to deal with those separately. But the MWRA is really dealing with the wastewater side.
Hi, my name is Maureen Dorman, and I live at 18 Wedge Pond Road. And I'm concerned about the Wedge Pond. My house was affected April 1st last year, and it was a horrifying experience. I was waking up in the middle of the night for weeks after that with flashbacks of the water running around my ankles. And it's a sanitary and a safety issue getting that cleaned up when it's primary living space affected. And it cost all of us time and money. And also, unfortunately, one of my neighbors had to leave earlier, and here's another neighbor, Polly. And between us is a family. Joe is not here tonight, and he has lost 18 inches of land from the edge of his land to the pond. I also stepped on his lawn this past summer, and his lawn is spongy. He's about ready to lose a tree into the water. Polly is about ready to lose a beautiful birch tree into the water. And in front of my property is just a little strip of town land. Right. And when I've gone out there to admire the beautiful wildlife, I've noticed there are some huge trees that are gone. So I'm wondering, are you folks looking at the Wedge Pond situation?
As far as the hydrology and hydraulics of we're looking at from a whole, watershed-wide perspective. So I mean, I believe Wedge Pond that's directly connected to the Aberdona, is it not?
From Horn Pond and then where the Stop and Shop is?
So that is part of the study area, and it's part of our modeling information. I don't believe that any of the existing 15 alternatives would have they would have somewhat of an impact if they were to lower the level in the Aberdona River, would put less of a downstream constraint on the Horn Pond system, but probably not as directly affected as some of the things that are directly on the Aberdona River. So that is another area to consider in our in our alternatives analysis, to realize that there's that your area is consistent with flooding as well. I think it's pretty widespread.
And the land is
problem.
deteriorating.
Yeah.
Because I would think that would be in the interest of the town to maintain the properties of homes and not to have the land fall into
Right. Sure.
In the I guess it's going on about 5 years, he's lost 18 inches times the length of his backyard. Are you working with the town of Woburn in terms of them releasing
Well,
water
that's
from
we will be
Horn
doing
Pond
with the neighboring communities as well.
And then what about retaining walls or land that's going to be falling? I mean, obviously you'll now look at that, the Wedge Pond situation.
Yeah, again, we're not at the point where we're doing design of a particular alternative or particular structural alternative. And we're going to be working with all of the communities in a much more general sense. We're not going to have within this EIR, for example, proposals for specific projects in Woburn that would stop flow coming from Woburn, because that's really outside of the scope of what we can control within this draft EIR project. There's a realization that there need to be projects in the rest of the watershed. Some of this has to be separated out just in order to be able to get some of these projects to move forward, because if you try to design everything in the entire watershed, you never move anything forward. So we're trying to take a piece at a time. Okay.
My name is Frank Vazella. I live on Tremont Street. I live by the high school field where the culverts are. When they filled in the river, the Aberdona River, put the culverts in, they raised the field 5 feet. That put the culverts 4 feet above my property. Now, when the flood comes down from Cross Street, the water,
Right.
it hits the culvert, before the culverts get full, we get 5 feet of water in our basement. Every time since 1979 it's been going on.
No.
What are they gonna do? Are they gonna build the bankings up? Are they gonna lower the culvert?
The shorter answer is, we don't know what we're gonna do there yet, because we have to first run the models.
Then why do you work upriver instead of downriver?
We're
We get all the
working-
water from the Cross Street culvert now. It's gonna be coming down there.
Yeah.
Before it gets under the culvert, be in our property again, and I'll sell it.
I understand. In this process, we're working
So,
in
it
the
seems
entire
kind of
river.
foolish we start upriver instead of downriver. Yeah, okay, that's all I get, okay.
Yeah, my name is Roger Jansen. I also live on Fremont Street. And actually, something that Matt mentioned, running a model to determine the elevation. Why don't you just come visit me at Fremont Street? I'll take a can of orange paint and I'll paint the outline of where the water was. You don't need to waste time and money to run a model to see the elevation the '98 storm came to. And while there was some improvement this last time, there was some minor flooding, because I think some of the downstream work did help take it away a little better. There's no question that you're probably going to upset that balance by making upstream improvements. Now, in the ranking of alternatives and looking at the costing of these, knowing the cost limitations that the town is under in terms of free money to be able to build some of these projects, would you look at the frequency with which flooding will increase in the particular area of Tremont Street if other upstream improvements continue to be made and that culvert capacity is not increased? And I will predict.
One of the things that we're tasked with doing as part of, of the alternative analysis, is not just looking at the alternatives as a whole in the evaluation, but looking at them also one at a time as they're proposed to be phased, so that you do if you do this project without these projects, you can be sure that you're not going to cause a situation where you might improve, flooding in one area at the cost, of increasing it downstream. But the goal will be to design it so that that you don't do that.
The Choctaw Field, the culvert under the field, that's on the table. I guess the experts really haven't decided, based on all their modeling, exactly what's going to happen there. Something's going to happen there. There's no question about it. We're just not exactly sure when it's going to happen or what it's going to be.
My mother, she actually lives at 16 Manchester Road, and the gentleman there from the Army Corps mentioned the project supposed to be moving along on Mystic Valley Parkway.
Right.
And I guess we were particularly interested in that in terms of, it sounded like maybe that's going to move ahead more quickly or sooner than some of the other stuff. And if that's the case, what is that? Well, I guess you intend to alleviate some flooding. Do you think that will have a more direct or immediate impact on what's occurring at Manchester Road? That particular area, the flooding that occurs there is groundwater. It just comes up. It just fills up the basement of the house. And I think what happens, from what I've seen at the gauging station there, the river seems to get up above 12, 13 feet and just shuts off the flow coming out of the street drain, so it fills up. So I was particularly interested in that project.
Sure. Well, it is a long, torturous process. The Corps' to build a core project. We're in the very beginning phases right now. We do the study, we write a report which makes a recommendation. The recommendation goes down to our division headquarters in New York. It's acted upon, assuming that everything's all right, and we do have a project that's approved, then it goes to design and then construction. I kind of hesitate to give you a time frame, but my guess is, if everything went really well enough before 2006, 2007.
I guess I would guess that a project like that, even no matter what you do, it's not going to really reduce the cresting of the river, though, in a severe storm event.
Right.
That seems to be the crux of the problem.
Sir?
My name is Brad Johnson. I live on Sylvester Ave, which is right on Pond Brook. And we're doing like 17 projects on the Arizona River. Do we know what percentage of this water comes into the town from Hong Kong Brook and what percentage comes from Arizona River?
That's
And
exactly.
if it's like 90% from Hong Kong,
Yeah.
shouldn't we be doing more in Hong Kong than?
That's exactly what the FEMA study is doing.
So it'll evaluate all of these tributaries,
Yeah.
they'll give you a volume differential?
Yeah, that part of the, part of this potential strategy would be to look at, are there controls that we can put in, throughout the watershed that'll reduce the volume, runoff that you get during the
Because-
storm. But, these are more, things that have to be done more over time, into the future, through new practices and things like that. But we can definitely, the advantage of having a watershed-wide model where we model all the flow in each one of the tributaries is that we can have a pretty good handle on where everything is coming from, and if you make, a change here, how does it ripple through the rest of the watershed and see what the effect is.
And the timing of the flows.
From a practical standpoint, the last major storms that we've had, I walked up to the Scully Dam and was just talking about, there were probably 60 people from the state scratching their head looking at it, wondering whether it was going to blow up or not. They were very concerned about it. And we lost 2 bridges on Hong Kong Brook that they had to replace. It seems like something worse is going on there than the upper part of the Arizona at this point. And we're doing all of these projects on the Arizona. Obviously, anything after Stop and Shop that's downstream will help us, and that's great. I just wonder if there isn't something that we should look at, other than just the replacement of the 2 bridges, which they've already done, that may help us alleviate the.
Well, excellent point.
Can I respond to that? Because, first off, the Scully Dam is a movement, so it's difficult for us to somehow get to movement and try to control what they're gonna do with that dam. Obviously, there's problems up there. In fact, when the pond goes now, it comes around the side of the dam. So there's really no control when pond gets to a certain level. Getting back to the culverts on Canal Street and Sylvester Ave, those culverts, the capacity of both of those bridges have been increased. They're much larger now, and I think while Conway.
That's arguable, they aren't. The one next to my house is not much larger. It's 4 feet wider and a lot lower. If anything, it's a little bit larger. But they were
I'm
both
not an engineer. We have the town engineer with us. Maybe he can tell us by what factor the capacity has been increased, but it has been increased.
Both culverts have been increased approximately 20%.
Oh, okay. It doesn't seem what
It's not. It's 4 feet wider and it's considerably lower, so I don't know how we gained 20%. But
The other 2 bridges have been fixed.
we hope.
Right.
They're lower than they used to be, we
They've
hope.
improved it. And they have.
And
Years ago, 'cause I lived there over 70 years, there used to be a waterfall behind my house. What they did, they filled in the river, put the culvert on top, and made a level with the waterfall used to be there. The waterfall used to drop 8 feet into the Arizona River down by the high school. They take the dam out of there, they raise the field, no more dam, and then we get flooded out. First flood in 1979, and it hasn't stopped yet. High school,
Yeah.
town of Winchester engineers,
Yes.
they caused the problem.
Yes, I was just wondering, about the hydraulic modeling
right.
that you're gonna be doing, and I was wondering what sort of models you're gonna be using. I know CDM used a swim model.
No,
We're using the model we're using is the HEC-RAS, it's the Army Corps of Engineers, it stands for Hydrologic Engineering Center River Analysis System. It's the predominant model used for doing flood studies of river systems in the United States for FEMA. The one difference that we're doing in this watershed from the typical one is we're doing an unsteady flow model, which basically means that we're doing a full hydrodynamic routing of the flows. The typical way to do a river system is you determine your runoff hydrographs and you do a river reach routing of those, and then you put that steady state flow into your hydraulic model, and you use one downstream condition, you model that all the way back up through the system. We're doing an unsteady flow model, which actually will take all the watershed inputs to the river system and then actually use the hydraulics and the storage available in the system and the characteristics of each bridge and culvert to model how the flow actually moves through the system. So you actually, you can see it moving as a wave, down through the system. So hydraulically similar, similar to swim, but Probably the biggest difference I would say is on the scope of this model. It actually includes, you know, all the bridges and all the tributaries within the whole, you know, within the whole Mystic River Basin, and also based on new topographic data for the watershed, so you get the best, you know, cross-sectional information for all the streams, and, you know, current to date, and also a resurvey of all bridges and structures, or at least the ones that, you know, the major ones that we didn't have plans for.
And changes in the rainfall statistics and hydrology.
Right, I mean, that's
a big
yeah,
difference.
one of the primary,
right.
just, you know, anecdotally, we're not finished yet, but is the, you know, very large increase in flows,
Right.
you know, in all of the tributaries compared to what was in the original studies, compared to the flows that we're seeing now are significantly higher.
I understand. I've been around Winchester and lived in Winchester since the mid to late 70s. Okay, I've been here since the 1975 flood. I sympathize with everybody that has flooding in their property. I have to be honest with you. I hear people sitting here talking about, you know, water rushing by their ankles. I've had my family taken out of the house in a boat on more than one occasion. Okay? We walked across our first floor because our basement was completely engulfed in water in the last flood, and walked through the puddles on our first floor. What is going to be done to solve the problem on Forest Street and Brookside? Now, I really understand that it's a town-wide problem. I understand there are varying levels of the problem in town. But I actually talked to, I don't know whether it was one of the town engineers or one of the town managers at one point in time, and the gentleman told me, I said, listen, why don't you build a wall along the fence that runs along Davidson Park? And he said, well, Mr. Welder, your problem isn't from the Abajona River. Your problem is from the highlands. The water coming down is from the highlands. I said, well, I'll tell you what, you come down my house the next time it starts raining real hard, and I'll put on a pot of coffee, and we'll go stand out by the fence, and we'll see where the water comes from first. If it comes up from the river or it comes down the hill. He graciously declined my offer. I don't blame him. I've been walking through that water for 29 years. He's not even here today, because he's long gone. What's going to be done along Forest Street and Brookside Ave?
Paul Wilbur, also from 10 Forest Street as well. I mean, it's evident that nothing's going to be fixed overnight, and obviously for every action there's a reaction here, up and down the river. But I'm wondering if there's a red flag or a green light that's, you know, that goes up in every single town along this river that says, listen, you know, X amount of time before we get this water at a certain time each year, we release. And, you know, obviously if so, that'll affect the river up, I mean the water up the river, but is it like that, or is it survival of the fittest, and all of a sudden we're going to get Woburn's water because they say, listen, we got to let it go, or we're going to give Medford our water because we got to let it go?
Yeah. What we found, I think, in the last couple of storms is that there was, I think, a lack of communication between communities. And I think we're doing a lot better here in Winchester, watching the weather and communicating with the DPW Superintendent Woburn, so to make sure that they're on the same page weather-wise.
Right.
So that if they can lower the Scully Dam, they'll do that so that Pond has a lower and more capacity to store rainwater. So I think the communities that are interconnected are communicating a lot better than we were in the past.
Each city and town should have to, you know, adjust every single spot that can be adjusted from the bottom of the river all the way to the top. It's like a domino effect. And being that the case, you know, if it's fixed downstream and then the next level up, it's going to work its way all the way up and at least, you know, help the situation from the bottom to the top.
Bill O'Rourke. I'm an engineer. I also live in Arlington, along the White Brook. And I also see flooding.
Sunnyside.
What I'm hearing today is a lot of projects that might be developed in Winchester. Flood storage is nice. However, I did hear that they're doing surveys on all the constrictions downstream, culverts, bridges, and adjacent floodplains. If it's Is this study incorporating some of those constrictions? Such that if there's a constriction in Medford or Arlington,
Right.
would it be better to spend money on these projects, open up these, allow water to flow out to the Mystic River and so on downstream, which would alleviate some flooding here in Winchester? Is that part of the study? Will recommendations be made not only in Winchester, but also in Medford, Arlington, and perhaps Woburn?
We certainly will be evaluating any impacts of any of the proposed alternatives that we have. That the Alewife Brook, little river, little brook in Arlington, those are all part of the hydraulic model that we're looking at. So we're not just focused on the Aberjona River as far as looking at impacts.
Will you be getting together with members of each town to talk about these issues? You're talking certainly about it with Winchester, but I'm certain things can be done in Arlington, Woburn, and Medford to help out Winchester. Is that part of this study?
Well, actually, back in, let's see now, 2001, actually, our board actually met with the alderman up in the meeting, with the alderman in Woburn. Unfortunately, nothing too much, ended up coming of that. I think part of that is sort of the state politically of how, the communities in Massachusetts are set up. With 351 different entities separate to ourselves, we don't really have an effective county system or an area system. I mean, what we do here in Winchester, we cannot force, Woburn or we're not in a position to say, no, don't do all that building up there in Woburn because it's going to flood us out. We're not in a position to do that. In the meantime, we get to hear, their mayor talk about all their new revenue and so forth, which is fine, but we're getting the overflow. But that's the way it is. But on the other hand, I think this is a wonderful opportunity to be able to have a look at the whole system as a whole and at least understand the impacts. I think once we can have a good and full understanding of what the impacts, and we know that people are extremely negatively impacted. And hopefully at that point you can start at least getting people to move, say, look, here is the evidence. We can show you what the problem is and what is potentially causing it. So it may be not the fast solution that we would all like to have, believe me. But on the other hand, you may be really building the basis for a longer-term solution and something that will be able to go forward in the future and really provide some real benefits.
I think once we put this program together and figure out how to fund it, we're going to go forward with it. And I would encourage any downstream neighbors, Bedford, Arlington, Lexington, further downstream, to really give it a serious look. Some of that information will be available, but it's the taxpaying citizens of Winchester paying for this study. And of course, we're required to look upstream and downstream. But we're going to, in the end of this, we're going to have a program, and we're going to be permitted, and we're going to go forward.
A comment on the Mystic Lake Dam, that has been studied extensively by the MDC. I'm confident that planning process has been done several years, no actions have been taken, so I think that knowledge is present if somebody wants to look it up. But my question is, somebody made reference to storage area as a primary alternative. Now, is that an academic statement or is that a real statement, in terms of Winchester proper?
Is that way we look at storage?
Yeah, one of the things we're tasked with is to look for potential storage opportunities. There aren't an awful lot of them. And the amount of storage that you would need to take care of some of the flooding from Lake Going Park Brook would be enormous. Incrementally, if we can find opportunities for storage, we're going to make incremental changes and affect the floodplains incrementally. This isn't a complete flood-proofing project. This is a project to identify the flooding and to help mitigate the flooding as best you can in some areas. And there's some areas you can, and there's some areas you may not be able to.
I noticed on the project schedule, the only line item that doesn't seem to have a firm fixed endpoint is the final EIR. Just has an arrow heading off somewhere out beyond 2006. Is there an anticipated date? And then I know EOEA is prone to taking its time to review many of these. You have some expectation of when it will be done, and from that point, how long it will take to get through the bureaucracy.
We don't at this point, because we honestly don't even know what the alternatives are that we're bringing forward in the draft EIR. And a lot of what winds up happening, and actually the MIPA has a very defined public review period. Once the draft EIR is filed, there's a very specific defined review period, which is different than what it takes sometimes to get a permit review. But there's a 45-day review period when the draft EIR is filed. And then they issue another scope for additional study in the final EIR. And not knowing what we're bringing forward into the draft, and not knowing what they're going to say on those alternatives, I don't even want to hazard a guess as to what the end point is, quite honestly.
I know, I can only imagine how frustrating. I lived in a community where I grew up which was subject to flooding. And I can only imagine how frustrating it is for people, and this thing has gone on forever. And it's a very complicated, difficult thing. A lot of folks, I suppose, don't necessarily, given what their experience has been, have much faith that in fact this is going to get resolved anytime soon. But I guess this board's commitment is very, very clear, and I think the point was well taken in terms of Arlington. So we are being asked by the community, our community, to do something about this. And this board is on the line and committed to do it. And it just requires us to be absolutely dedicated and continuously applying ourselves to this. However long it takes, we got to stay with it.
What we tried to do when we started this process in 1999 was find a way to simply take this water and move it through this town faster. And that way, we thought we would relieve neighborhoods like Forest and your situation over on Tremont Street so that it would reduce. It's not going to eliminate. And everyone should realize from the beginning, this is not flooding elimination, but it's flooding mitigation. And it's not only the Epizona, it's of course Holland Pond Brook, but it's also drainage projects.
Right.
We're making a lot of progress with drainage projects in this town. It's also fixing I&I, which I'm heartened to hear that with the Cummingsville project, we're going to get some actual relief in that regard. So it's a multi-pronged approach to solving it. While we wanted to do it faster, quite honestly, with the structural proposals we made, there was no way to do it without getting financing from another source. That's where the Army Corps of Engineers comes into place. And as soon as you tap that funding source, you immediately get into this long-term study project, because otherwise you don't get their money. When we wanted to do the other projects, we immediately ran into the need for permits. We tried to get waivers of getting those permits, and the authorities that supersede the town of Winchester said, no, you can't get them right now. You're going to have to study these alternatives to see if there's a better way.
In the whole, as opposed to project by project.
Right. See if there's a better way of doing it. We're convinced that at some point, when all is done with this, we're still going to have a way to mitigate flooding. It may not be the original plan, but we'll have a way to mitigate flooding. We'll have financing in place from other sources to help us do it. So it's not only on the taxpayers of Winchester, but I'm sorry that it won't take place quickly. And I wish I could say, and there's no one who can promise you it's going to be quick, but we're moving as fast as we can, and I know that sounds like you can't believe that, because it just moves this slowly. I wish it could move faster than that, but this is the process we're stuck with. There is no substitute for this process. The Board of Selectmen has tried to think of any other way that we can get the financing we need, to get the permits we need, that would be another way around these obstacles. But there isn't. We've got to go through this process. So we're going to keep ourselves on top of this process to move it as fast as we can. And we think in the end, it will provide relief to the neighborhoods that have expressed the same frustration every time there's a lot of water in the town. But it won't be elimination, but it will be mitigation. And we're going to try to get as much mitigation as we possibly can at the end of the process.
Julius, Selectman Prager?
Yes.
Yeah, I just did want to comment to, and actually did give a great vote of thanks actually to the voters of Winchester and the taxpayers of Winchester, because when the stabilization funds 2 years ago were approved, the capital stabilization funds were set aside not just for regular capital projects, which we know we have, and have always been a challenge for us to fund, as you know, but the selectmen said, as we went out to the voters, And we made a commitment that a good portion of those funds would be set aside for flooding improvements. And that includes funding for this project, for this study, as well as ongoing contributions toward other projects. Because of course, federal money doesn't come necessarily for free. It does require a match. But we are very fortunate, and I do personally thank the voters of Winchester and the taxpayers of Winchester because of their confidence. We will have the capability of being able to fund these projects in due time.
In 2001, the water reached a level of 7 feet in my basement. Took the oil tank, raised it, tipped it over, and flooded the basement with home heating oil. The DEP was in there faster than you can unbutton your shirt, telling me that I needed to clean up the environment that I polluted. Somehow or other, that individual had it reversed. I didn't invite the Abajoma River into my cellar. It came in on its own, tipped up the oil tank, and put the oil out into the environment. Now, he made damn sure that I paid to get that cleaned up. There's government telling me, you made a mistake, you fix it. Now, I've been in Winchester for 9 of these flood events. After that 2001, a new cellar floor was poured, a whole new heating system went in, and a basement that was finished was left as a cement box. Now, here's where it gets off the point. 9 floods later, the damage to the foundation of the house is now beginning to manifest itself. And when I say, who's going to help me with that, the DEP guy doesn't come in and say, me. Nobody wants to say to me, we will help you restore some of the damage caused by the flood to your property. What I'm saying is, I, and probably some of my neighbors, need an advocate who jumps outside the box of this plan and says, somebody needs to help those people who have suffered damage that has not been redeemed by the flood, flood insurance.
One question over there. Tom Bargowski from Sunset Road. The river reaches about 8 feet from my property. I do not get river water into the basement. I get groundwater into the basement. Now, I'm wondering if the gentleman is doing a groundwater level survey as well as the inflow survey of the river water?
I'm sure that the flooding elevations, you know, that are experienced during storm events are having an impact on that, though. So, you know, by mitigating for that, you know, may very well see an improvement to that, as well as improved functioning of the surface drainage systems when you have a lower, you know, elevation.
So hopefully, if the water moves through the area faster, the groundwater won't rise above the basement.
Right, in the absence of specific knowledge of your, you know, situation.
I had a question.
Okay.
Russ Wise, I'm on 14 Forest Street, and I was just wondering about the dredging behind the Davison Park there. I know there had been some discussion about it in the past, and I'm wondering where that ended up. I mean, was that hazardous materials in there, or what's can't be removed? I guess that's my question.
And we have with us Bob Conway, our town engineer,
Right.
and I'm not exactly sure where the status is of dredging that. I don't know if you have updated information, Bob?
I think we transferred the money into the culvert.
Is that what we did?
Yes.
Yeah. There's an awful lot of environmental issues with regards to this. And those will be studied and looked at and hopefully mitigated as we put this program together.
Right.
It's about 5 minutes of 9, and I really would like to wrap this up. You can stay and ask questions, the team will be.
Exactly, as I mentioned earlier, you know, we'll be here for a while. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to talk to you.
Access is empowerment.
Access is technology.
Access is involvement.
Access is expression.
Access is community.
Access is fun.
Access is knowledge. Access is democracy.
Access is free speech. Please be part of the Access experience. Contact your local Access Center for more information.